our evening performances. It's always fun to start Founders Day with the voices from the past. We're trying to celebrate our heritage. Obviously, I specialize on Asa and Ambrose Call, our founding fathers. But as you look around this cemetery, all of these people are founding fathers and our founding mothers. So it's great that we can honor them with this kind of a presentation tonight. This would not be possible without about 4 different groups. You always need a little money to get something started, and the Founders Day Committee and the Haggard Too Good Trust takes care of that end of it. But you've got to have people that do research, you have to have people that do the legwork, you have to have people who do the organization, and you have to have the actors. So I want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to the Algona chapter of the AAUW, who heavily are involved in that legwork, and the Kossuth County Genealogy Society, doing the research, getting the facts about our forefathers and our foremothers. And that lets the mayor have somebody else that can take care of that end of it. So very, very thankful for that. I'll put in one promo. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, I'll be doing a tour of an area called the Wild Haven area, and we'll explain what's that all about and give you a physical look at the property. It involves about a 20-minute walk around the water, but then we'll visit the different buildings and explain what's going to be happening in those buildings and what's going to be happening with that property. So that's 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Drive down, and Teach Street is right across from the Ron Peck auction, and you just park right on Teach Street, and then I'll escort you into the property. Okay, it's my pleasure this time. One of those groups that does a lot of the work, the Algona chapter of the AAUW, representing them this evening is Ms. Jane Nettleton. So let's give her a hand.
Well, we wondered if this was really going to happen. And it did, and this is great. So we want to thank you all for being brave enough to come out here, no matter what the weather was going to be, and to join us for the Voices from the Past. And we have 4 very interesting places for you to visit tonight. So that means we would like you to divide up into 4 groups of approximately the same size, and then you will have a guide that will lead you from one point to the next. And on the way, they're going to tell you a little bit about some of the really neat gardens in Algona, past and present. And so that will be on your way to the next site. They will tell you a little bit about some kind of garden. We wanted to feature gardens this evening because we know that the Bouldridge family had some excellent gardeners involved. So we're adding that to our list tonight. So if you can divide yourselves up.
About 15 in each group to do the job, Jane. 15 in each group.
So these people right here, and how about these folks right over there? Can we make that one group? Okay?
This is Mary Corning, and I would like to share with you my story and my family story. Can you all hear me?
No.
You need to talk louder.
Hold up a little bit if you can.
Okay. First, I will pass around my picture. On the back, on the other side, are 2 pictures of our house, which I will tell you about in a minute. I realize I look rather stern in that photo. In the 1800s, when I lived, there was an unwritten law that no one could smile in pictures. The law must have been strictly enforced because no one ever smiled in early pictures. I was born in Canada in 1823. My maiden name was Milligan. I later moved to New York State, where I married Mr. Bosanko. There's nothing known about Mr. Bosanko in our family archives other than his name. We don't know if he died or if we divorced. Later, in 1852, I married William Cordingley, who had been born in England and came to America by himself when he was only 17 years old. He did have a brother who also came to America, but we don't know when he came. William was 21 years old when we married, and I was 29. One family wag suggested that having been on his own since he was 17, perhaps he was looking for a mother. After living for a while in New York State, we returned to the land of my birth, Canada. There, my husband opened a shoe store. We were blessed with 4 children: Alice, Robert, Joseph, and Essie. We also had a foster daughter, Mary Ellen, who took the name Cordingly, although her birth name was Puget. When Mary Ellen was 12, our Alice was 9, Robert was 7, Joseph was 5, and Essie 2. That was the year 1867, when we loaded up a covered wagon, and the 7 of us, William and I, and the 5 small children, journeyed from Canada down to Algona. It was not an easy trip. My husband again opened a shoe store. His brother was here also and went into business with him. The shop flourished, and in 1885, my husband bought a half a block on Call Street from Algona's founder, Ambrose Call, and built our lovely home at 721 East Call Street, which remains in our family to this day. On the other side of my picture, the top photo is of the home as it appeared in a souvenir booklet entitled Picturesque Algona, published in 1900. And the second one is after a wraparound porch was added. We had a wonderful tennis court on the land north of our house. That is I sitting in the rocker. Let's see, have I passed that?
Yeah, it's on the back.
Yeah, okay. You have to look kind of closely. That is I sitting in the rocker. And if you look more closely, you can see the family dog by the corner of the porch. We have always been a dog-loving family. By this time, our daughter Alice was married to J.R. Blossom. They had 2 little boys, Josh and Claire. When Josh was 4 years old and Claire 18 months, Alice succumbed to tuberculosis. She had gone to California to try to regain her strength because it was thought the warmer air would cure tuberculosis. Sadly, a cure was not to be. She was only 28 years old. Josh and Claire came to live with us. My daughter Essie was such a help with them. She really was their surrogate mother. Our sons, Joe and Robert, had left the nest by that time, so it fell to Essie to help her father and me, as well as take care of the 2 little boys. However, Essie also had a wonderful social life, with her many, many friends and many, many beaux. These pictures show her with a group of her friends, probably a small club that they had formed. In the other photo, she and a friend are in costume for one of the pageants that were often held back then. In 1894, when Claire was 10, tragedy struck again. He died of the same ailment that had taken his mother, tuberculosis. The newspaper at the time described him as a happy, much-loved boy. A manly little fellow, beloved by all who knew him. He was a beautiful little boy. And you can see that here. His death was a terrible blow for Essie, and she mourned him the rest of her life. As I mentioned before, Essie had many beaux, but it wasn't until a handsome young lawyer named John W. Sullivan came to Algona from Iowa City that she gave her heart away. Mr. Sullivan's photo is on the back of the picture of Claire. Their courtship was the stuff of which grand love stories are written. The ardent attorney wooed her assiduously for nearly 3 years. Essie and J.W.'s wedding was described in news accounts in the Algona Courier at the time as the event of the season. Here are just a few excerpts from the account. The ceremony was witnessed by many, and the occasion one of beauty, elegance, and pleasure. The very interesting suit which our respected townsman, J.W. Sullivan, has been prosecuting for the last 3 years came to a most satisfactory and happy conclusion last Wednesday. It was to him the most important suit that he ever was or ever will be engaged in, and he pressed it with his well-known skill, proving himself as successful a wooer as he is an advocate. He won his case and his prize, a bride of whom he has just cause to be proud. Essie, accordingly, has always been admired as the possessor of all the qualities that render a woman lovable. 4 priests presided at the ceremony in St. Cecilia Church. After describing the church itself, the article continues. The groomsmen, bridesmaid, bride, and groom looked the best that their friends ever saw them. The bride wore a gown of cream white lansdowne trimmed with lace and threaded with pearls. She carried a bouquet of cream roses, and in her hair was a silver ornament and roses. The groom and groomsmen wore elegantly fitting suits of the conventional black. Today, Essie's granddaughter, Molly McDonald, wears her gold wedding band. It is inscribed J.W. to Essie, April 24, 1895. Under that is inscribed their own wedding date, February 2, 1963. Following the ceremony, the bride and groom rode off to the residence of the bride's parents, where dinner was served. Since our house is just a half block from the church, it was not a very long ride for the newlyweds. The verbose editor concludes with, "It is with a feeling of deep regard for and admiration of J.W. Sullivan and his bride that the Courier wishes them long and happy lives. It can be truthfully said of them both that all who know them are their friends." My husband and I welcomed J.W. into our family, and the young couple made their home with us. Essie continued to take such good care of us. Essie was 30 years old when she married, and they were disappointed that no children appeared. However, after 10 years of marriage, when Essie was 40, their son Wade was born. We all were, of course, thrilled. However, just 1 month later, I died unexpectedly. And now, Essie will continue sharing with you our family story. One moment.
The good thing is the high tombstone, isn't it?
Hello, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed my mother's account of the Cordingley history. Like most every family, we have had times of sadness and times of happiness. Only our faith in God has enabled us to struggle through the heartbreaking times. Our son Wade was the apple of our eyes, as you can imagine. This is a photo of the two of us. Wade is wearing the baptismal gown I made for him. That gown has been passed down to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The last to wear it was little Molly Scarlett, who was baptized in Los Angeles 2 years ago. I'll tell you one little story about Wade, and you can decide if we spoiled him. One Sunday afternoon, we had friends come to call. As we sat in our living room visiting, or trying to, Wade, then 4 years old, sat in the middle of the floor with a hammer and a small chair, which he proceeded to pound on noisily and vigorously. I finally said to my husband, "Dad, shouldn't you do something?" J.W. thought a minute, then replied, "We can buy more furniture." It's amazing that Wade turned out as well as he did. He grew up to be so generous. It was not uncommon for me to buy him a new coat or cap, only to have it disappear and later be seen on some less fortunate lad in his school. When Wade was 11, his father was elected to the Iowa legislature. He was sent to Des Moines for the express purpose of defeating a movement by the northern half of the county to break off into its own county, with Bancroft as becoming the county seat. J.W. was successful in blocking that proposal and served just that one term. While he was in Des Moines, he wrote beautiful, loving letters to Wade, full of fatherly advice and suggestions. Many of those letters are still in the attic of our house. Wade was graduated from Algona High School in 1922. His football prowess brought him to the attention of Knute Rockne at Notre Dame, and he joined the Fighting Irish, playing on the same team as the famed Four Horsemen. Following his college years, he worked in Chicago, then came back to Algona to be a reporter for the Algona Upper Des Moines, then later became postmaster. When he married Cecilia Kelly of Emmitsburg, my husband and I had a house built next door to us as a wedding gift for them. Wade and Cecilia had 2 daughters, Sheila and Molly, who grew up in that house. They spent many happy hours with me, hopping across the driveway to visit or sometimes stay overnight. I loved having them, and I'm afraid I spoiled them just as I did their father. Once, Molly and her friend Marilyn Driesman were playing upstairs and decided the large oak bed that had been my parents' would make a good trampoline. They bounced too hard, and I heard a terrible crash. I rushed upstairs to find the bed slats in pieces and Molly and Marilyn looking startled. "Oh, girls," I said, "you really mustn't jump on the beds." I heard Molly telling someone years later that that was the closest thing to a scolding she ever got from me, and she said she felt terrible. I was blessed with good health all my life and was able to enjoy traveling and a lively social life right up to the day I died at 93 in 1958, at age 93. Wade and Cecilia then moved into the Cordingley house and kept it in the family for another generation. When Cecilia died in 2004, my granddaughter Molly and her husband Bing became the 4th generation to live in the family home. When their children and grandchildren visit, all of us who have gone before look down and love seeing the 5th and 6th generations enjoying our home. Here's the last picture. This is the home as it looks today. Note the requisite family dog in front. Thank you for listening to this rather long account of the history of our family. It's been lovely sharing it with you.
William Kelly Bowlby. It was my wife Fanny and I who decided to move up to this neck of the woods back in 1902. We were living in Missouri. And, our cousin and Britt have told us that Iowa is much more of a progressive place, and people were open-minded. And the thing that enabled us to move and fit up in here was horses. And that's not just because we used horses to pull the cart out here with our mom. It was because that's what I did for a living. I was a plow horse team trainer. And around here, there were plenty of plow horses back then. But that was our family history. My granddad was the original William Williams. See, I'm William II. William I was born in 1810. He was born in Kentucky. That's where the horses come in. Lexington, Kentucky. And what happened, there was the Missouri Compromise, which allowed, slavery in Missouri, so a lot of the Kentucky families moved to western Missouri by Kansas City, which is where the Kansas Border Wars, Missouri Border Wars happened. So my dad, John Bouldridge, he was born in 1840, and he grew up with a lot of the guys that were known as bushwhackers, guys like Frank James, but he trained their horses. Anyway, he trained a lot of their horses during the Civil War because he could do it kind of out of the way, and these guys, the town didn't want these guys around town. So my grandpa did a lot of horse training. But no, as far as he was a slave until he was 20 years old, and then they started paying him wages because they didn't want him to run off. Because a lot of the slaves were running off because the Yankee Army was there. And the Yankee Army would take them to Kansas. But no, he stayed with that family through the Civil War. And another thing was the families, they were small-time operations, and they didn't use whips and overseers. And a lot of times you worked alongside the person who was your slave holder. So they kind of, my dad didn't want to run off because he was going with my mom who lived down the road and he didn't want to be hurt. Anyway, I was born in 1865. So I grew up, we had a farm that I grew up around horse breeding myself. And me and my brother, we learned breed horses as teenagers. I was about 16 years old, we got our first horse. My dad brought this horse home, and it was from Frank James. And it wasn't much of a horse, but he said, if us boys could train it, we could have it. And that's how we got our first horse. But no, my dad knew all those, there were a lot of the Cole Younger gang and all that. He knew all of them, because he took care of the horses. And that was like a promo for him because they were meticulous about horses. The fact that they used him shows how good he was for horses. But no, it was 1880 and my dad started having champion stallions in the stallion show. And then my brother and I kind of followed him after that. In 1890, we had champion stallion. I mean, we entered 1891, we entered our first two stallions. And we got a big write-up in the paper about how great we were. Here's what it said. The paper said, of the two colored boys, James and William Bouldridge, it gives us great pleasure to speak. They are two of the finest young colored men in the country, and through honest industry have acquired the two champion stallions, Rusty and Star of the West. There was no better promo you could have had. But no, I was doing really well there. From 1898, I met my wife Fanny. She was a school teacher at a colored school. And Fanny was 11 years old. She lost her entire family except for her sister. Her sister jumped out of upstairs window and got severe burn. And so she lost her parents and her other sister. But there was a woman named Mrs. Lynch who adopted her and taught her the virtues of hard work and manners and etiquette, and even taught her how to play the piano. But anyway, well, we decided we wanted to get married and we wanted to get out of Missouri, so we talked it over. We thought we came up. My cousin was in Britt, Iowa. He said we should move up to Iowa. So We knew it was going to be cold up here. We knew we were going to be working around Germans and Irish, maybe even Norwegians. But we knew there was plenty of plow horses up here. So we came up here and we settled in Groden. And that's where my four kids were born. 3 girls and Bill, my son. My daughters were Alberta, Eleanor, and Denise. It was around 1910. I was doing some work down by St. Joe. I think it was one of the Tilches boys was telling me that there was an 80-acre place down there. And so we got that. We moved over there in 1911. And that was our little house on the prairie. I was plowing with teams of horses, and my kids were walking to the country school. That was only about a 3-mile walk then. They just walked up to the country school right outside of town here. Then they walked to the high school. They went to the high school. That was about almost 7 miles. And the worst part about it was you had to walk up the hill in town. And that was a lot steeper hill then than it is now, I'll tell you how it goes. But no, our kids, they got along good in high school. We always told them to be a good example for the race. Fanny always said, you do anything bad, you make the whole race look bad. That one never quite caught on in the city. But no, and I always told them, anytime we went somewhere, my motto was, act like people. And so we got along pretty good. 1922, Fanny joined the church. And Fanny kind of took over. First thing she did, she got her Sunday school class. She called it the Star Sunday School class. And she started having things like Halloween parties. And I think that's where that tradition came. We still have those today. And I think she's the one that started that. It's 1924. I got hurt real bad. Team of horses ran off. And my son had to quit high school because I couldn't do any more hard work, field work. But that summer, when I was hurt, the farmers came in. I think it was Jewel Patterson and some of the Irvington farmers came in and did our oats, combined the oats, and stored the hay for us. And that wasn't the only time the neighbors helped us. In 1949, my son got the mumps. Daughter came home from Bryant's school and gave him the mumps. But he was 42 years old. So he was on his back for about 10 days. And that's when all the St. Joe farmers came in and did the spring plowing in one day. Guys like Francis Erpeding, Lawrence Miller, Earl Patterson. So that just shows the kind of support we had out there. No, we lived out there at that 80-acre place until 1939. Through Prohibition, through the Depression. Prohibition was no problem because there was a bootlegger in Livermore. We made sure that everybody was taken care of. Load and liver on the burn. And St. Joe, he did a whole lot of business in St. Joe. But 1940, my son, well, we moved across the road. There's a 210-acre place to the west, over the hill past the river, and we moved over there. And I was getting ready to retire, so my son kind of took over that place. And he got married. He married Dorothy Comley from Webster City. That was a real find for him. She was a real lady, kind of a ladies' lady, actually. Great housewife, great mother. And I sensed there was kind of a nobility there with her. I'm not sure. But now we lived, Fanny and I, then we moved over to Irvington. And that's where we retired. That's where we spent our golden years. Right next to the church, we had a perfect place to spend your golden years. We had chickens, we had a big garden, and a big backyard. And Fanny had all kinds of flowers. We even had one of those big tire swings for our grandkids. But no, and before we moved though, we were down on the trail there when they paved the road, 1949. 1934, I think they paved it from Mountain to Mount Heritage. 1935, they paved it all the way to Humboldt. So we couldn't call it the Dam Lagoon Trail anymore. We had to call it Highway 169. And that was quite a deal when we were just going like, wow, it's paved all the way to Fort Dodge. Well, we couldn't believe it. But no, we spent our golden years there in Irvington, and 1952 they had a big celebration on our golden anniversary. We got to walk down the aisle into the wedding march and say our wedding vows again. So that was quite a great thing. Well, a few years after that, Fanny's health kind of went down. In 1956, she only spent a couple of days in St. Anne's Hospital before she passed away. And after she passed, I knew I wasn't going to last much longer. Anyway, my son and his wife, they kind of took over the family legacy of being neighborly. They had all kinds of friends there in Riverdale. I know when the early days of TV, everybody loved company. You loved to have company and you loved to be company. People would start getting televisions, and every time somebody would get a new TV, they would invite my son's family over. There was Saturday night pro wrestling, Friday night boxing, Grand Ole Opera. Of course, the biggest thing ever was always the girls' state basketball tournament. But no, my son and daughter, they did great raising their kids. They all did good in school. And, and they last, it was 1985. Well, actually, the kids did good in school because my two grandsons were both best citizens in the class. They both got scholarships. But, after we passed, it was kind of the end of after my kids passed, it was the end of an era, and that's when they named Rose Garden. It was dedicated to my son, who tended it while he was in Algona. But he would be the first to say it was kind of a family thing. And it was a good deal for everybody involved. People that didn't celebrate the dedication. But anyway, Fanny and I weren't there for that. The best thing about that, too, the Rose Garden, it's right next to the school where my grandkids went to grade school and where my kids went to high school. But we weren't there for the dedication, Fanny and I weren't. But you know it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for us. So we take great pleasure.
My name is Havens F. Watson, and I was the general manager of the first store in Calls Grove, which later became Algona. And it was exciting to come here and do that, and to be an integral part of the early community. Now, in 1854, the Call brothers came here and got things started. But it wasn't until 1856 that the general store came in. For 2 years, if you were going to get provisions, you had to go to Cedar Falls, or, the closest place was 50 miles away. So Major William Williams was in Fort Dodge, and he decided that Calls Grove was large enough to have a general store. So he hired me to run that general store. That's how we came here. But before I go into the things we did in Algona, let me introduce my wife, Mary, and she will tell you about our early days.
Well, I started life as Mary Livingston. I was born in Syracuse, New York in 1834. My husband Havens was born in Syracuse in 1829. And we were lifelong friends. We lived in the same neighborhood. I never knew my father. He passed away when I was a baby, and I was orphaned by my mother at the age of 7. And I was blessed to have a family who would take me in and raise me. Now Havens, his father was the local Baptist minister, and he believed in education. So Havens was educated in Mexico, New York. When he graduated there, he went on to the Fulton Seminary, and Havens worked as a principal for a couple of years. Then he went to work for a store in Syracuse, and later on he went off to the city of Chicago to work for a few years. Well, since we had lived in the same neighborhood and we grew up together, we kept in correspondence with each other, and it was clear to me that he wanted to move to the frontier, and I was ready to go with him. So in 1855, we were married, and we left and settled in Fort Dodge.
Now, it was in Fort Dodge that I met Major William Williams. And he had come to Fort Clark, which later became Fort Dodge. He came to Fort Clark in 1850. He was a commander of a battalion of troops. He also was the head of the store in that fort. And so when the troops left, Major Williams decided to stay, and he founded Fort Dodge. And he decided to build a supply center for the small settlements in northern Iowa at the time. They needed a central supply center, and they needed general stores. And Cosgrove had been growing, and he decided that I could be the person who would go to Cosgrove as the manager of the store. He hired me, and I came to run the store here.
And if you could have seen that first store, it was really nothing more than a shanty at the site of the Moore's cabin. That store housed the post office, and that's where you went to pick up your mail. And my husband, Havens, was appointed the postmaster. He took care of that. After that, we determined that our home and the store needed to be in the same building. So we had an actual wood frame house or building built to house both of those, our home and the store. And actually on the same day, 2 wood frame houses went up at the same time. Ours by the Carnegie Library, and the office for Lewis Smith that was on the western side of the courthouse.
Now, we were very fortunate because we were able to move into the house before the winter of 1856 and 1857 began. But when it came with a fury. It was a very hard winter. It started with snow, it ended with snow, lots of snow in between. And it was extremely cold because of the heavy snow cover. And when the prairie winds would come in, we would have blizzard-like conditions that were unrelenting. It was so hard that a number of our neighbors were unable to leave their homes for the duration of the winter. And we were concerned for some of the young people. In fact, there was a young couple, Joseph and Nancy Thompson, who lived east of town. And Mary and I knew they just didn't have enough provisions to last the winter. We were concerned about their survival. So I talked to Mary, and we sent a message to the Thompsons, come and live with us for the rest of the winter. We'll be glad to share with you, and then you can go back home when spring comes. And spring came kind of late that year. But they took us up on it. They decided to come in and live with us. Now they decided to leave on Christmas Day. And we didn't have the kind of weather forecasting then that you may have now. So it was snowing pretty hard on that day. They might have been better just wait a couple days. But they came in and they left early in the morning. It was a 2-mile walk by foot, but they didn't get to our house until late in the evening, long after dark. We have been very concerned for them because of the heavy snow. When they finally got there, we had them warm up by the fireplace, and it took a while for them to warm up. And then we shared what was left over from our Christmas dinner with them. It was good to have them in the home. We welcomed them.
I was so glad to have that winter in that new house. And, you know, we were so isolated from that winter, we hardly saw anyone. So it was great to have Joe and Nancy stay with us for that winter. In fact, we became lifelong friends because of that time.
Now, in 1857, I became the first sheriff of the county. I also was elected a little bit later the county treasurer and the recorder. So in addition to the general store and the post office, I had 3 other positions. But I was honored to have them because I felt like we were doing something lasting in building the settlement here.
You know, when we moved out west, we left a lot of the comforts of New York, and one of those was having some entertainment, cultural events. Now, I was happy to be part of a group here in Algona to begin the Algona Reading Club, and what we would do is get together. Some folks would read selections from classical novels, some folks would read what they had written themselves, and then we would join together for discussion and, of course, refreshments. I really like that part. I really enjoyed those evenings, and I looked forward to every evening to come.
Yeah, those were good. I tried to go to one. I seemed to be unwelcome, so I didn't go to one.
Probably had to arrest somebody.
But the thing is, in those early days, there was an anxiety amongst us because of the relations with the Indians. The government had tried to have a treaty with the Sioux Indians, but it didn't go well, and there were some bands of Sioux that were very unhappy. And so it was that we were anxious about it. And that anxiety became alarm when we heard about the Spirit Lake Massacre. On March 8th through 12th, 1857, a band of Santee Sioux attacked a number of small settlements that were near Spirit Lake and near Lake Okoboji. And 38 settlers were killed. And 4 young women were taken hostage. 2 of them later died. One somehow got released, another one was held for ransom and released. But when we heard about what had happened, we became very afraid. And we decided we better build some forts in order to protect ourselves. And so we built a fort in Algona and a fort in Irvington. And the one in Algona was down, we built it around the town hall, which it would be where 120 East State Street would be today. And it went up pretty fast. The lumber mill had to work night and day to prepare the lumber to build the fort, and also to prepare the lumber for the fort in Irvington. Once the fort was built, we realized that we did have some guns, but we didn't have enough ammunition. So I volunteered to go to Fort Dodge to procure ammunition. And Abe Hill and Mr. Skinner went with me, and I asked for Mary's blessing. She said to go. I was a little worried about leaving her behind with the children, but she said to go ahead. So the 3 of us left for Fort Dodge, and we had heard about bands of marauding Indians. So we were very wary and vigilant, and we looked in the tall grass and in the deep woods. We were afraid we might be attacked at any moment, but we weren't. We got the ammunition, and we came back home safely.
Well, you know, 5 years later in 1862, there was the New Ulm Massacre that put another shot of fear into the community. At that point, a brigade was put together, the Northern Border Brigade, and Havens enlisted. But that meant he had to leave and go to Estherville to build Fort Defiance. And I was very sad to see him leave because I didn't know if he was going to be able to return.
the New Ulm massacre, even more settlers were killed in that massacre, and we knew something had to be done to band together to protect ourselves. And so Mary and I talked about it, and she encouraged me to enlist. And you know, I had a responsibility to my family, but I had a responsibility also to help protect the other settlers. So I went, and I left Mary. And there was a lot of pressure on Mary because she had to do a lot of things. But she was a trooper. She came through. You didn't disappoint me. You did a great job. Because here's what she did. She not only ran the general store, and she ran the post office, and she was a friend to everyone, but she would visit the sick, and she would just take care of people. If they had a need, she'd go out of her way to meet that need. I heard about this after I came back home from Fort Defiance. One day, she heard about fever striking the family of Dr. Kellogg, who lived in Cresco, 4 miles south of Algona, west of Irvington. She heard about their dilemma, and she set out on foot and forded the river to get there. And she went down, took the medicine, and she sat with the ill all night. And then she got up in the morning to come back home and still did all of her duties. That was my Mary. She was somebody you could depend on.
Well, finally Havens came home, and we went back to running the store. Now the store was in 3 separate locations, one at the site of the Carnegie Library now, the other site was at City Hall, and the third site was west of the courthouse. And you know, we worked hard in the store, but in 1870, Havens closed the store and bought a farm.
That was my dream.
And so on the farm we raised our 3 children, Lyda, Laura, and Ed. Lyda is buried over there at the end. And we had many happy days on the farm.
It was a remarkable time on the farm. We grew vegetables, we raised farm animals. It was a rich life. And we were blessed to raise our family there. And we were there for 30 years. And Mary continued to be involved in the community. She was the epitome of a good Christian woman in every sense of that word. We had a good time, but you know, it's been said that all good things must come to an end, and so it was with our time on the farm. Because on March 9th, 1900, my Mary passed away after a brief illness. And when we had our funeral at our home, it reminded us of those early days of that first winter, because it was snowy and it was cold and the roads were almost impassable, but still some of the old pioneers came out to the house and they witnessed to the goodness of Mary, to the sacrifices she had made, to the kindnesses that she had done. It was so good to have them come and affirm how what she had done had helped to build the early community of Algona.
Well, Havens finally retired, but he lived in Algona until 1913 when he was 83, at which point he moved in with our daughter Lyda in Chicago when he was 84. When he was 84, there was a sad occasion. He was hit by an automobile and broke his collarbone, broke several ribs, and really had a bad gash on his head. Since he was unconscious, he was taken to the hospital and no one knew his identity. My daughter had to search high and low for her father and finally found him and brought him home to her home in Chicago, at which point Havens passed away, and she brought Havens' remains back here to the cemetery where he was laid next to me.
So I came home because Algona had really become our home. We had been born elsewhere, but when we came here, we found ourselves. It was a hot summer's day, and my body was interred here. I was laid to rest in this sacred place. My wife and I never regretted coming here. In fact, we feel like we were blessed by God to come here. We lived here, we worked here, we raised our children here. This was a truly great place to live. And those early days that we were a key part of, well, we were just so happy to be a part of that. In the obituary for Mary, it said this: that band of early settlers was among the best people this country has ever produced when they came together to form the early settlement of Algona. We were proud to be among those early settlers. Thanks be to God.
Thank you very much for coming. Everybody can hear me okay? All right, well, I'd like to introduce my very capable and hardworking wife, Edna, and also one of our hardworking hired girls, Regina.
And this is my busy husband, Charlie Murtaugh.
We didn't always live in Algona. I was born Charles Bartholomew Murtaugh, November 14, 1881, in Waverly, Iowa, the third son of James and Mercy Blossom Murtaugh. My father was a harness maker and my mother was a homemaker. Because I was the youngest son, I was able to take advantage of our family's improved financial status and graduated from Shell Rock High School in 1898. After that, I attended Nora Springs Seminary for 1 year. Thanks to my very hardworking older brother Ed, who had quit school and gone on to make his way in the world, I was able to get a job with the Burt National Bank, and then after that I moved on to Fenton, where I got a job at the Fenton Savings Bank, which was also owned by my brother. Then as time went on, I moved to Ringstead, where I got a job at the Ringstead State Bank, which was the best move that I had ever made because that is where I met Edna.
It was a good move. At least I thought so. I was born the same year as Charlie on June 14th, so I always teased him about being older and wiser. My parents, Robert and Estelle Craddy, lived on a farm near Esterville. I graduated from Esterville High School, then went on to State Teachers College in Cedar Falls. Sorry, lost my train of thought. I started teaching school at Ringstead and loved it. Then I met Charlie and loved him more.
We were married near Armstrong, where Edna's parents now farmed in the family home June 29, 1904. It wasn't long before my leadership skills and hard work were recognized, and I was asked by the Democratic Party to run for the state legislature. I represented Emmett County in the Iowa House from 1910 to 1912. After that, I moved back to Ringstead and became president of Ringstead State Bank.
We moved here in 1912 when Charlie took a job as a cashier at his brother Ed's County Savings Bank of Algona. We found a house on North Thorrington Street that had been owned by C.A. Palmer. I fell in love with that house, with its Carpenter Gothic style and those lovely gables. There was just one thing. The Palmers had done a lot of traveling throughout Europe and were attracted by the Japanese lacquer look. They decided to paint all the dining room woodwork, the doors, the windows, even a built-in china cabinet, a shiny black. I couldn't wait to get in and liven things up by painting it a soft ivory.
By then we had a very large family, 4 children and soon another on the way. They loved the house. The house had a big backyard for lots of area for them to play, and it extended all the way to Hall Street. And in the backyard there were several buildings, including a chicken house and a 3-story barn. In the lower level of the barn were 3 stalls for the horses. At the lawn level is where we kept the carriage and the tack room. And on the 3rd level we kept the hay and the horse feed.
While I didn't mind hard work, having 5 children meant I needed a little help. Fortunately, there were a lot of strong girls in the area who were willing to move to Algona and help families like ours. Regina Lehman was one of our favorites.
I loved you and your family as soon as I moved from outside of Whittemore to work for you in 1915. The children were lively and clever, and Charlie and Edna were fair to me and treated me like family. I did cooking and childcare and almost anything that needed to be done in the house. The hardest was laundry. There was a lot of it, and we used a hand crank washing machine. The kitchen was the old-fashioned kind with a coal-burning stove.
We all missed Regina when she married in 1920 and moved with her husband, Julius Boss, to a farm near Whittemore. The Bosses later moved to a farm northeast of Algona in 1933. During all that time, our families remained very close. Our children loved to go stay on the Boss farm, and Regina's son, Julie, looked forward to staying with us in town where he could visit the Algona swimming pool.
Although our house may have lacked a few conveniences, we were able to get one of those fancy new motor cars in 1916. I was scared to drive it, but our oldest daughter Helen had no qualms about it. At age 10, she was our first driver.
Helen was also the first of our children to graduate from Algona High School. She was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa at the University of Iowa, where she graduated in 1927. We were pretty proud of her. She then married a local man, Theodore Call Hutchison, and they eventually moved back to the area, which made us so happy.
Then came the crash of 1929. By the early 1930s, most of the banks in the area had gone under, including the County Savings Bank in Algona, our bank. With no job, a large family to care for and tend to, I took a job as the State Comptroller of Iowa in 1933. Until 1937, I was essentially the state treasurer for Iowa. During that same period, I was president of the Iowa State Fair.
We had to do some economizing, but there was enough for food on the table and enough to make a meal for new families in the neighborhood. When I welcomed them with a warm meal, I was quick to ask them which church they attended. If they said Presbyterian, I made sure our church welcomed them. During the Depression, attendance dwindled, but we and a few other families kept our little church going.
Edna taught Bible classes, and she ran the food stand at the county fair. She was also the competent president of several organizations. A lot of the Presbyterians in the church knew Edna as the woman with the mop when we cleaned the church. That was because Edna could find any little suspicious cranny that wasn't quite clean enough and polish it until it looked as bright and shiny as the rest of the church. I should know I was on the board of trustees and the treasurer as well.
When I ran for the school board, a lot of people said I was going to clean up the schools too. As a former teacher, I was happy to do my duty to the people of our school district.
In 1936, I moved back to Algona and became president of the new Security State Bank, for which I stayed until 1961. These were very full years. With our children grown and gone, Edna and I threw ourselves into all sorts of community activities. I was the Kossuth County Democratic Chairman for many years and the chair of the Democratic Central Committee of Iowa for over a decade. I was a charter member of the Algona Kiwanis Club and a past president.
I became a member of PEO as well as many church activities. With our children gone to far-flung places like Long Island, New York, Kentucky, Arizona, and even Korea, it was too quiet to stay at home.
In the late 1950s, Edna became very ill. She was in the hospital for some time, and even when she returned home, she was confined to the house. This was very difficult for Edna because she loved doing for her friends and family. She did eventually recover, but she was never quite herself.
In the winter of 1959, I took a night class on oil painting at the high school. Before then, I had mostly painted in watercolor, so this was a whole new world for me. The next spring, I felt the chimney was in need of some repair on our house. Our grandson Tom found me on on the roof working on it. The whole family was horrified, but I just couldn't let things like that go.
On August 3rd, 1960, Edna died. My world was never the same.
By then, my husband had died, and my son Julie was long grown with high school daughters of his own. When the Murtaugh family asked me to come back as Charlie's housekeeper, I was glad to do it.
My life went on in some fashion. Regina and Helen were a great comfort to me, but they could never replace Edna. In 1961, I retired from the bank, and on October 14th, 1964, a citizen of Algona for 52 years, I died, looking forward to my reunion in heaven with the love of my life.